Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's information session put on by Community Board 2's Health, Environment, and Social Services Committee. My name is Brandon Smith, and I'm the chair of the Health, Environment, and Social Services Committee. As with any meeting that we conduct on the Zoom platform, there are some protocol items that I'm going to read before we get started. I ask that you pay attention to it, and we will address it in that course. First of all, this meeting is being recorded in accordance with public access and archiving, in accordance with New York State open meetings law. It's a practice of Community Board 2 to conduct remote meetings with all committee members' cameras on. Public attendees are also encouraged to leave their cameras on, particularly if you're given the floor to speak. All attendees, please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking. To make an appropriate discussion, and I'll make it known when and which topics are open for comment by committee members, board members, and the general public at large. We are committed to providing access for all of our neighbors, regardless of physical ability or limitation. If you require accommodation or assistance for full participation, please contact the district office 72 hours before any public meeting. We ask that anybody who is speaking, including those of you who are in the public, please use plain language, speak in a moderate tone, and frequently ask if you're speaking loud enough. For those of you who are presenting, please read the title of each slide that you're presenting and describe any images on the slide, such as photos, graphs, and charts. Now, I also want to emphasize a point that I've repeatedly emphasized at our Health, Environment, and Social Services Committee. There is absolutely no tolerance for any disrespectful behavior by anyone at this meeting or at any meeting of Community Board 2. It doesn't matter if you're a member of the Community Board Committee, a member of the board at large, member of the public, or someone presenting. If there's anyone who's acting disrespectfully, I'm going to ask the hosts of the meeting to remove you from the meeting. With that said, we're going to go forward into the business items for tonight's meeting. Just to go over a couple additional protocols, unlike a number of community board gatherings, tonight's gathering is a informational setting for folks to learn about the proposed shelter that is being built at 1 Hoyt Street. It's not going to cover anything beyond the issue at 1 Hoyt Street, which is the sole focus of tonight's meeting. And it is an informational session, meaning that community board business will not be conducted at tonight's meeting. But with that said, we are going to have an opportunity for folks to make comments, ask questions. And for the sake of time, and due to the fact that we have nearly 100 participants in this meeting, I'm going to ask that each person keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes. And if you're nearing the deadline of the 2 minutes, I'll give you a friendly warning. But at that point, I'm going to ask that we move on to the next person. So I hope those are helpful ground rules for conducting our meeting. We have 2 presentations here. The first presentation is from the Department of Social Services, and the second presentation is from the provider at 1 Hoyt Street, which is the African American Planning Commission, Incorporated. Do we have someone here from the Department of Social Services who will commence with the presentation?
Yes, hi, Brandon. This is Jocelyn Carter. I am the DHS, Department of Homeless Services Agency Administrator. I'm here with Erin Drinkwater. She's a Deputy Commissioner at Department of Social Services. So the two of us will do an overview, and then Matthew from AAPCI will do his presentation.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to go ahead with that. And if possible, can we try to keep it at maybe about 15 minutes or so we have plenty of time for question and answer?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Quick question. Is there a 100-person cap on this meeting?
Sorry, at this point, I'm going to ask that I'm just going to give a friendly reminder to everybody. about this. We have a protocol here where any questions need to be raised to the chair. And there will be time for public comment, at which time I will make it known when that is available. I believe the question was answered in the chat anyhow. And at this point, I will ask Ms. Carter to proceed with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. So like I said, I'm the agency administrator at Department of Homeless Services. And so we are a subset of the Department of Social Services. HRA, Human Resources Administration, is one leg. Department of Homeless Services is one leg under the Department of Social Services. So I like to start these presentations by really talking about broad strokes about homelessness in New York City and how we got to where we are. Emily will talk about our pillars that we're operating under and give some more specifics there. So between 1996 and 2014, because wages remained flat and skyrocketing rents, homelessness increased 115%. But between 2011 and 2014, because of cuts made in the city and the state levels, homelessness shot up to about 40%, to about 51,000 people in shelter. And so what happened was, because of those cuts, individuals who came into shelter had no means to exit. And so the population really grew for those folks who needed help and who came into shelter. And so we had to really think about, how do we help individuals when they come to us have some place that's safe to stay and to help them to exit and to go to permanency. And so we had to think through, how do we do that? And in 2017, in February, we announced the Turning the Tide plan. Erin is going to talk about what that is specifically, but I'll tell you a little bit about where we are now. So what we have been able to do is to really drive evictions down since then to now 40%. And we did that even prior to the pandemic. And so we have the
with
first—
apologies, we appreciate the presentation. We're seeing in the chat that a lot of people who are
Excuse me,
trying
Mr.
to join the
Shapiro.
meeting.
Mr. Shapiro.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
please-
I'll conclude the comment.
Mr. Shapiro,
a
this is
lot of
not the
people
time
who
for
are
public
trying
comment. The board office is looking into the issue with the capacity, and I'm going to ask that we please return the floor to Ms. Carter. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm sorry about the cap, it seems. And so I was saying that evictions have really been driven, we've driven it down 40%. And so we have the first in the nation right to counsel, so that we are really stemming the tide in decreasing the numbers of people who are coming to us because they evicted. We also have been able to help about 170,000 people exit shelter or not come to us. So we've been able to, with our own, using our own subsidies, to have people not stay with us, but to exit from shelter. And of course, when we think about the shelter system, it has been haphazard, right? Dating back 40 years, it's just been really spread up all over the city with no real way of management or what it looked like. And so we've been working to transform this haphazard shelter system and really shrink our footprint and open up really good, high quality shelters, one of which is this one at 1 Hoyt Street. And the last thing I'll talk a little bit about is, when we think of folks experiencing homelessness, the first thing that people think of are those who are experiencing homelessness, who are unsheltered. That's a very small percentage of our population, right? But we've been able to get people to come in off the street and, over the years. So we have sheltered New Yorkers who are in facilities, and then they are unsheltered. So this facility for those who are experiencing homelessness and need to be sheltered. And for us, that's an emergency. And so part of what we've been able to think about is, how do we do it in a comprehensive way? I talked about the Turning the Tide plan, and that's our blueprint. And we'll walk through the 4 pillars of that and give you some more specifics about what those are. And then we'll move over to Matthew.
Thank you, Administrator Carter, and thank you, Community Ward 2, for hosting this evening's meeting. So as Administrator Carter mentioned, we've been operating since 2017 under a comprehensive plan called Turning the Tide, a plan that Mayor de Blasio issued. This plan has 4 pillars, which are really the guiding principles of how we implement this comprehensive approach to providing shelter. The first is really focused on prevention. At the start of this administration, there were 14 home-based offices. Home-based offices are community-based organizations working to connect individuals who are on the verge of homelessness to programs like getting rent arrears paid, utility arrears paid, signing up for cash assistance, SNAP assistance, providing landlord-tenant mediation, a whole host of preventative services really focused on prevention for people coming into shelter. Today, we have 26 home-based offices open and operating across the 5 boroughs. Additionally, as Administrator Carter mentioned, under this administration, we implemented the nation's first ever right to counsel. Under this program, individuals who are in housing court are able to be provided legal counsel, and we've driven down evictions by 41%. And this was certainly before.
Ms. Drinkwater,
yes.
I just want to stop you for 1 second here.
Okay.
I think that for everybody in attendance, and unfortunately, those of us who are community board members don't know the nature for sure ourselves of the of whether or not there is in fact a 100-person cap on the meeting, and it does seem that the meeting is capped at 100 participants. Perhaps if we could give this a few minutes, just to
That's not a problem.
let the board office try to get to grips with this. I want to make this presentation is being recorded, so I think no doubt whatever the answer to this is, there is a record of what's transpiring here.
Right, but not everyone's able to ask their questions.
Mr. Hovsepian, I appreciate your input. If you can give us a few moments to try to resolve the issue and understand what we have going on.
No problem.
Thank you so much.
So I'm going to suggest that we give it about 2 minutes to try to figure this out, at least in the short term, what the plan is, and then we'll see if we can proceed in this manner. Does that sound reasonable, Ms. Church?
It does. Thank you so much. We just need a few minutes. Thank you.
So Brandon,
Mr. Dew, just out of fairness to everybody else, if we can just wait on any comments. I know the board office is working on this issue, and I hope that for everybody's benefit, we can get a resolution here shortly.
okay,
Thanks.
well, when you do open up the floor, I would just like to make a comment about something that was said by the presenter about when the
I'm sure you would, and I will absolutely give you the floor, as I will give everyone else here the floor to make that comment. But I think for
Thank you.
everyone's benefit, for all I know, someone would like to have access to this meeting who would be greatly benefited by your comment. And I want to make sure that whoever that person is has the ability to participate, particularly if they're not being allowed in the meeting at this point.
Thank you for continuing to be patient. We're still actively working on figuring it out. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, you're ready to go.
Great. Thank you very much, Taya. I'm going to give it another few minute or so here, just in case anybody was trying to log in and maybe gave up and needs to come back. It does look like we're up over 100 people in the meeting. I know there are some concerns about timing, and I'm going to reiterate that we're not looking to have an extensive meeting tonight, but at the same time, I do feel that it's important that the public be heard here. So I'm going to absolutely do my best to make sure that we hear from as many people as possible. And I'm not going to cut it off at a particular time if anyone's worried about that. But I think given that looks like we're stabilizing around 113, 114, then went back to 113. Just for the benefit of these extra 13 or so people, Ms. Carter, would you mind dialing it back to the beginning of your presentation? And
Sure.
I think we can go from there.
Sure, I can certainly do that. I think, thank you. I know it's sometimes it's frustrating, but thank you. I am the administrator for the Department of Homeless Services. My name is Jocelyn Carter, and I did just a broad brush of homelessness and how we got here. I am joined here with Erin Drinkwater, who is a deputy commissioner at the Department of Social Services, and Iris Rodriguez, who was one of the people who couldn't get in, is on now. She is a deputy commissioner at Department of Homeless Services, and she manages the single adult shelter system on our end of the between the social services organizations, is social services, DSS, HRA, Human Resources Administration, and us, Department of Homeless Services, that makes up that consortium. So I talked a little bit about just how we got here and how homelessness increased and why it did that between 1994 and 2014. And that's really as a result that wages stayed flat, income did not increase, but rents went up, right? So it increased to 115%. But even more between 2011 and 2014, the city and state cut funding, so people were not able to exit and people who came into shelter. Homelessness even blossomed because rents continued. There was nowhere to exit. People, homelessness increased 40% during that time. And so one of the things that this administration wanted to think of was, how do we manage that? How do we stem that tide? What do we need to do? And in February of 2017, we really announced a blueprint called Turning the Tide, and Erin will go through those pillars. There's 4 pillars, but I like to really talk about what we have done. We really drove evictions down 41%, not 40, 41%, because we have the first of its kind legal system where every person gets a lawyer so to prevent evictions. And so we've been able to do that. Just working with, sorry, driving evictions down, ensuring that we open high quality shelters, making sure that folks who come to us have some place that's safe. And this shelter will be one that's a high quality, and changing this haphazard system that we've had dating back 40 years, because shelters were not really designed. And so we want to shrink our footprint 45%, we'll be able to do that, and really look at the way we develop our shelters, the way we work with communities, the way we select our shelters and communicate with those in the neighborhoods. And so Erin, I'm going to pass it to you to talk about our Turning the Tide plan and give those 4 pillars, run through a little bit faster so that we could get to Matthew and into question and answers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Administrator. So as was said, we've reduced evictions by 41% through the nation's first ever right to cancel program. Under the past couple of over a year now, under the pandemic, we implemented that irrespective of zip code. So any New Yorker who is in housing court facing eviction is able to gain access to legal representation. We also increased the number of home-based offices across the city. When this administration started, there were 14, there are now 26. This is really focused on the first pillar, which is prevention. We want to do everything that we can to ensure that individuals are we're preventing them from going into shelter. This might be paying rent arrears and utility arrears. We've more than doubled the payment of rent arrears and utility arrears under this administration, making it easier for individuals to gain access to that, to ensure that folks are able to stay in their home. We built from scratch rental assistance programs. As Administrator Carter mentioned, in 2011, the Advantage Rental Assistance Program, which was funded by the city and state, was cut. We rebuilt those programs from scratch. Through those programs, we've moved more than 175,000 New Yorkers out of shelter or avoided entry into shelter. About a third of the individuals of that 175 number are individuals who were able to maintain their placement in their community by ensuring that they had access to this rental assistance to fill the gap between wages and income for those who are eligible. Through that rehousing work, as I mentioned, 175,000 people have benefited. The third pillar is working with New Yorkers who are experiencing homelessness on the street. When this administration started, we had about 200 outreach workers working to connect New Yorkers on the street to housing to come inside. We now have more than 600 outreach staff who are canvassing the city 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, working to connect New Yorkers to programs and services to bring them inside. We've also increased what are called stabilization beds. These are low threshold beds for individuals who are predominantly on the street. When this administration started, there were about 600 of those beds. There are now more than 3,000 with additional beds coming online in the coming months. These are low threshold beds. There are fewer restrictions for individuals who are coming inside, and we recognize this to be an important piece in the process for folks getting access to benefits, programs, and services to transitioning back to permanent housing. Through this work, we've helped more than 4,200 New Yorkers come in off the street and stay off the street. This is getting placement in the safe havens and supportive housing units that this administration has brought on through New York City 1515. These are permanent housing placements with on-site social services. They can be congregate or scatter site units, and supportive housing plays a critical role in the solution of homelessness. And then the last pillar is really about transforming the shelter system, which grew up haphazardly over the past 40 years. We have, as Administrator Carter mentioned, reduced the Department of Homeless Services footprint by about 45% through closing commercial hotels that the city has utilized on and off for decades, as well as getting out of cluster units. Cluster units are private apartments that the agency has used. At the peak, we were using over 3,000 of those units, taking them off of the affordable housing market to be used as shelter. We are on our way to make the commitment to get out of clusters. We'll have more on that later. We also made a commitment to open 90 high-quality shelters with providers like AAPCI, who's here with us tonight. The project proposed at 1 Hoyt Street is for a single adult men's shelter. And I want to talk just a little bit about how individuals get connected to shelter in New York City. For our single adult male population, we have a single point of intake. So if an individual is in need of shelter, they would come to 30th Street, our Bellevue Center. This is our intake center that all single adult men come to. At intake, we learn a little bit about the person. We learn what are the reasons for them seeking shelter? And this is really important because from day one and the first interaction that a person has with our staff, we're really working on an independent living plan, on transitioning that person from the experience of homelessness back to a permanent housing placement in the community. When a client comes to us at intake, the first thing we do is we try to prevent them from coming into the shelter. Is there rent arrears that need to be paid? Was there an illegal eviction that through legal services, we might be able to preserve the tenancy? Are we able to connect them with rental assistance? Would family and friends be willing to take that individual in? If those options aren't available, the individual would then go to what's called an assessment shelter. The city runs and operates a number of assessment shelters across the boroughs. At the assessment shelter, we learn even more about the individual. And the purpose for this is to ultimately determine what is the best program placement for a client. We operate different types of shelters within our single adult capacity. We have shelters for working or employable individuals. We have shelters for our seniors who are experiencing homelessness. We have shelters for members of the LGBTQI community who are experiencing homelessness. We have mental health and substance use disorder shelters. And then we have what are called general population shelters, of which 1 Hoyt Street will be one. These are for individuals who might be experiencing homelessness because of the difference between the wages that they're earning and the rent that they are paying. They might have some social services needs that while they are in shelter could be addressed. The location at 1 Hoyt Street will be operated, as I said, by AAPCI. The location will have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week security with on-site social services, as well as off-site linkages to social services. And I'm now, just for the interest of time, going to turn it over to Matthew to talk about the program that will be operated at 1 Hoyt Street, and then certainly look forward to answering the community's questions and hearing feedback from the community this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Matthew, are you here on behalf of African American Planning Commission Incorporated?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. You can proceed with your presentation. If you can, try to keep it to maybe about 10 minutes or so that we can have enough time for question and answer.
Sure. My name is Matthew Okabi. I'm the founder, CEO, and executive director of African American Planning Commission. It's a nonprofit organization founded in 1996. Our mission is to address homelessness and specifically those issues that often lead to homelessness, such as domestic violence, HIV and AIDS, shortage of affordable housing, unemployment. We currently operate a domestic violence shelter in Brooklyn. It's one of the largest domestic violence shelters. It is one of 3 shelters in New York City that also accepts male survivors of domestic violence with their minor children. We have men in our shelters with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. We also operate a domestic violence shelter in the Bronx. In addition to that, AAPCI also develops affordable housing. We recently opened a brand new supportive housing project, which is 126 apartments in Brooklyn, in Brownsville. We're currently working on developing a new affordable housing project. It is 233 apartments. On the ground floor, we have a bank. On the ground floor, we have a sit-in restaurant. We also have a beauty salon, and we have a radio station. In addition to that, AAPCI also operates 7 homeless shelters, shelters/hotels. We have approximately over 1,000 individuals, both single adult men and single adult women. The shelters are scattered all over New York City, in every borough other than Staten Island. We have close to 250 employees, and the shelter at 1 Hoyt Street that we're proposing to operate is going to be somewhat similar to what we currently do. It's going to have case management services, housing placement services, job search assistance, vocational services, substance abuse referral services, clinical staff, linkages, security, and we are developing linkages with the local police precinct. I believe it's the 84th precinct. As I said before, one of our goals, one of our missions is to develop affordable housing. And as we have currently done with our current affordable housing, we move individuals from shelter into affordable housing. They do not necessarily have to come just from our shelters. They come from shelters all over New York City. They fill out an application form and they gain access. They're interviewed by the City of New York, generally HPD, or New York City Human Resources Administration. And because of the interest of time, that's pretty much what we propose to provide at 1 Hoyt Street. Before I forget, we also going to have, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that the project is going to be operated. We have 24-hour security. There are cameras within the building and outside the building. On the ground floor is we're working with the owners of the building to provide security within the neighborhood as well. We're not exactly doing the entire neighborhood and providing security, but within the vicinity of the shelter, there will be security provided 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If there are any other questions, if anybody has questions for me, please feel free.
Thank you very much. And before we get into that, I do just want to take a moment and formally thank the staff from the board office, Carol Ann and Taya, for resolving our issue with the meeting attendees. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure that the folks who were able to make it into the meeting appreciate that too. Thank you for your hard work, and know that it is appreciated. I want to open up the floor initially here to members of the Health, Environment, Social Services Committee in the event that any members of the committee have any questions. After that, I'm going to open it up to board members and members of the public. And in the middle of that, I'm going to ask for some feedback of the written feedback we received from the community, which was submitted to the board office. So let me start this by asking, if you raise your hand or indicate you'd like to ask a question, and you're on the HES committee, I can I will call on you. And I immediately see Jessica has raised her hand. Jessica, feel free to introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Brandon. And thank you both for the presentation. Thank you all, I should say. They were really informative and succinct. I'm Jessica. I'm the secretary of the HES committee and of the full board. I just want to share that I think it's really important that we invite folks facing homelessness and housing insecurity into our community and that they stay in the community where they live, which is also our community. So I really appreciate this. And I guess it's a bit of an open question, probably mostly for Aaron. And I'm curious if there were one or two things that you think would be most helpful from the board or for those of us here to advocate for this shelter, what would you most recommend us do?
Sure, thanks for the question. We've been opening shelters under the mayor's plan for some time. We always have community advisory board meetings with the shelters. So one thing that community members can do, board members can do, is if they're interested in donation of their time and talent to the community advisory board, that's certainly something. We've also found really great partnerships across our shelters in terms of opportunities to partner with the clients at the locations, going on, walks and talks, connecting the shelter to resources in the neighborhood. We've had some community boards, sort of draw out locations in the neighborhood that could be places for clients to spend time, whether that be libraries, the public pool, that sort of thing. We've also had community groups do welcome kits for the individuals at the time of move-in, coat drives, that sort of thing. So there's lots of opportunities. Matthew here is on the call from the organization, and then my colleague, Yuri Sanchez, who is the Brooklyn Borough Director. She would be a great contact to follow up if there are any things like that the community would be interested in getting involved in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Einhorn?
1 second, Brandon, if you don't mind. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our chairperson, Lenny Singletary, on this call, as well as Assembly Member Joanne Simon.
Well, thank you, Ms. Church. I haven't had the opportunity to scroll through the attendance list, although I do see Mr. Singletary, Assemblywoman, as well as our city councilman-elect, Mr. Lincoln Ressler. I guess I'll take a quick moment and ask not to put you in any particular order. So I guess I'll try alphabetical order. Lincoln, is there anything that you wanted to say or ask?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak briefly. I thank you to Community Board 2 for convening this meeting, and thank you for the Department of Homeless Services for coming to join us, and thank you to all the residents who are here with us tonight. There's a lot of healthy interest in the future of One Hoyt. As some of you may know, I'm the incoming council member, so I'll begin January 1st, but don't yet have a staff and haven't been involved in the communications to date with DHS. But from what I understand, the communication has been unacceptable, and the city and the elected officials, we all need to do a better job of sharing information with the community when we get it. And you have my word, I will do my best that when I receive relevant information from city agencies, we'll try and get it out to all of you in real time. I know that there are a lot of fears. I know there are a lot of anxieties and concerns that many residents in downtown Brooklyn have expressed to me. And I recognize that many downtown Brooklyn residents had a challenging experience with the DHS clients who were in the hotels on Duffield Street during the height of COVID. I want all of the residents to know that I empathize deeply with your concerns. And I do believe, as the incoming council member who will be representing this site as it presumably opens, that I'm gonna make it my responsibility, my solemn responsibility, to do everything I possibly can to make sure that this shelter is a good neighbor to the downtown Brooklyn community. And my hope is that the downtown Brooklyn community will also be a good and welcoming neighbor to this new site. As we move forward, these are the priorities that I think are most important to try to make sure that this is an effective, a well-run shelter and a good neighbor. One, as Erin just mentioned, we need to set up a community advisory board where elected officials, local residents, community board have an opportunity to engage consistently with the shelter operator and DHS to make sure that our issues are being addressed in real time. Two, we need to make sure that there is as strong as possible a social service model at the site where we have strong clinical staffing, strong social service staffing, so that the clients, the residents of this site are getting the support and services that they need. And thirdly, we need to make sure that there is a really strong security plan that includes community outreach workers from the shelter at 1 Hoyt Street, walking the neighborhood consistently, engaging with residents, making sure that we're not having quality of life and safety issues around this new site. I'll be honest, I've worked with a lot of homeless services providers over the years, and I'm not familiar with the provider, but Matthew, I look forward to getting to know you, to visiting other shelters, and to, holding you and DHS accountable to making sure that that this is a very well-run facility. In my experience, the biggest variable in whether a shelter is a great neighbor or a challenging neighbor is the quality of the provider that runs the site. And so, I plan to work with you, support you, hope that we can galvanize support from the local community, but also hold you accountable to make sure that this is the kind of neighbor that the residents in downtown Brooklyn deserve. So thank you for the presentation. Look forward to listening and hearing folks' questions and concerns, and doing my best to advocate to make sure that we have a good neighbor here at 1 Hoyt Street. Thank you. And I want to say one other thing. A lot of folks have a lot of questions about the DHS process and how shelters get cited. I think it's just worth noting the Department of Homeless Services essentially has unilateral power to put shelters where they deem appropriate. And so elected officials, community boards receive notification, but do not receive the opportunity for consultation or input. And so the Department of Homeless Services has a hard job. It's not an easy task to find housing for many tens of thousands of New Yorkers who have no place to go. And if we sought the approval of every neighborhood and community, then we wouldn't have any shelters at all. And so while this process was not a good one, and I know that we can do better moving forward, this is how it works. And so my hope is as we move forward, we can make the best of it for all of the residents of downtown Brooklyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Lincoln. Assemblywoman Simon, I'm really grateful that you're here and would be honored if you wanted to say something as well.
I take it you called on me. My computer went in and out a little bit, so I didn't quite hear what you said.
Oh, I said nothing more than just that we'd be very honored to hear any comments that you wanted to make at this time. Thanks.
Well, thanks. I do want to say that, I want to kind of, put a pin in what Lincoln said about the process, particularly in this instance. It is true that this is a Department of Homeless Services mandate, and that engagement with elected officials in advance of a citing decision it is not part of that process. We have had several shelters in the 52nd Assembly District. In many instances, people raise many important questions. I think one of the things that I think is most important is that people have an opportunity to have their voices heard, to ask questions of DHS and the operator. Those of us who have lived in this vicinity for a long time had recent experiences with facilities that did not work out. They may not have all been shelters, but they didn't work. Many of us remember the old Bond Street drop-in center. I know a lot of my neighbors still have scars from that experience. Nevertheless, we also have many well-run facilities that are in our community that have been our neighbors and good neighbors, and we've been good neighbors to them as well for many, many years. And so I think it's most important is learning as much as we can from this operator, asking some of those questions. They may be tough questions, and expecting accountability both from DHS as well as the operator. So thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate both of you coming here and being a part of this for the community. I want to also ask Chair Singletary whether you wanted to make any comments or ask any questions. I recognize that you are here and don't mean to make you wait any, but be happy to hear any feedback that you've got.
Thank you, Brandon, and to the committee. Brandon, you do an excellent job as the chair. I'm going to make my comments brief because I think it's important to hear from the community. We have 155 participants now, and I think it's great that they have that many people, and it's important to hear from the community. I do want to take a minute to thank again Deputy Commissioner Drinkwater and her team, because I've had the opportunity to engage with them in the past. And for the purpose of full transparency, while I understand the comments of soon-to-be Councilmember Ressler and always the wonderful comments of not only community advocate, but also Assemblywoman Joanne Simon, as I've said to the Deputy Commissioner, I have one major concern about the proximity of the location, proposed location, and what we know is still on the plans to be a community-based, borough-based jail. I have real concerns about the close proximity. So that's something I would hope that we will learn more from. And I know that the Deputy Commissioner has given me her word, which I have no reason to doubt, that at the appropriate time, the fair share analysis will be communicated with the office. And so I anticipate that shortly. That will tell us a lot more. But I've also said to the Deputy Commissioner, I know she knows that we've been honest and transparent with each other. As this community board holds the local restaurants, the small businesses, and everything along the Atlantic corridor, including Hoyt, because there's a lot of small businesses, we will still hold you to the same accountability. It's not fair to hold small businesses to one accountability and let the city agencies do away with another. So in the extension that AAPCI, which has a great track record, and any of the potential community partners don't do a proper job of creating a structure that makes the shelters part of the community in a positive way, we will hold you accountable. And I think there's a mutual agreement for that. And honestly, my conversations with Deputy Commissioner Drinkwater, she wants that, she welcomes that. So I think we're off to a good start. I'll stop there and make sure we have enough time for the community to give their thought.
Thank you, Mr. Singletary. And for Deputy Commissioner Drinkwater, and did you want to have any response to any of the comments from any of our dignitaries who just spoke?
Sure, I certainly want to thank Assemblymember Simon and Councilmember-elect Ressler. We want to work not only with our elected partners, but with the community members. The way that shelters are successful is to have open and honest dialogue, to be able to establish pathways of communication. AAPCI mentioned the neighborhood patrols that they'll be doing, but also being able to have on-site contact for folks in the community to be able to reach out to. These are the conversations that are helpful to our providers as they're working to both be good neighbors in the neighborhood and work to, in turn, have the community be good neighbors to our clients. So I certainly welcome the comments so far. As Mr. Singletary had mentioned, the agency will be issuing a fair share prior to opening. We do hear the concern about the proposed borough-based jail and the proximity to these projects, and that will be taken up in the fair share analysis. I'll leave it there. Interested in hearing more from the community and responding in turn to the community's questions and comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to the Health Committee just for a moment, as it is our committee's session here. And I believe I had asked Ms. Einhorn if she had a question before we entertained our dignitaries. Ms. Einhorn, did you want to go ahead and ask your question at this point?
Yes, thank you. So I'm curious if DHS and the site provider and also full disclosure, I believe that shelter is a human right. I'm excited to have this shelter within our district and to support it in any way that I can. But knowing our community's concerns or some of the community's concerns about the site, I'm wondering if you guys can speak to how you assessed this specific site to be the right shelter for our community. And if you can speak to any escalation protocols that'll be in place to address some of the community's concerns.
Sure, I will start, and Aaron and Matthew could jump in. I could just kind of talk about how shelters come about for us. We have an open-ended RFP that's out. So if there's a developer or a landlord, whoever has a building, and they present a building to us, a non-profit provider can submit an RFP. Once it's charged and rated, DHS, our staff will go and look at the site. Does it meet the regulatory, what the state say we need to have? Is there enough space for programming? Can it provide appropriate shelter? Does it meet the needs for the clients that we would put there? And so if it meets those specs, and then the proposal is rated and charged, and yes, then that's how it comes to us. The provider then submits the proposal about what services would be provided at that site. So it has to be appropriate case management. We have to think about staffing, think about how we're going to manage security, right? There's a question around, is there, in the community, Matthew talked about having patrols. We also say that there is opportunity for communities to have a 24-hour number to reach the provider if there are not good neighbor issues happening. We want to make sure that the provider can be reached. If there's any person who's there who's not being a good neighbor, we do and we can transfer. So it's not, and Aaron talked about how placement happens. So people are not just coming in and walking into the buildings. It is a process that comes through the DHS beginning at our site and then assessed and then placed. Aaron, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it, Administrator. I mean, one of the points in the open-ended RFP that the provider must demonstrate is what we call site control. They have to demonstrate that the building owner or landlord or developer is ready and willing to work with the provider for the particular location to be used as shelter.
Thank you very much. Next on our committee, I believe I saw Ms. Anadu. You had your hand up. Would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, it was more of a comment than a question, if that's okay, Brandon.
That's fine, but just for
okay,
everyone's fairness, yes, the 2 minutes.
Yes, I'll keep it quick. I would just say, so I'm obviously lucky enough to be a member of your committee. I would just say that in this moment, I would just hope that everyone has some compassion and recognizes that any one of us could end up in a situation where we need help. And I would hope that we are all given the grace to be able to get the help we need and not be seen as somehow inherently criminal, inherently lesser than, inherently needing curfews. We have no idea what circumstances put people in this situation. And again, I just think that let us all have some humanity. The same things that brought us to these neighborhoods because we wanted better schools, we wanted job opportunities. Everyone deserves that. And the idea that somehow, because you are in this situation, that you don't deserve the same proximity, that you somehow deserve to live further out, that your commute should somehow be longer, your kids shouldn't have access to the same schools, is like heartbreaking. Again, any life event could put any of us in this situation. I'm sorry to hear that there were unfortunate circumstances that happened last year during the pandemic, but I also think that was just crazy time for everyone. And one of the things I think will help prevent crime is actually giving people the opportunities and the life circumstances that allow them to make a better place. And having a roof over your head is a basic need. And I will shut up now. Thank you, Brandon, for the time.
Thank you. Ms. Cumberbatch.
Good evening. I just wanted to know, in terms of like the day program at the shelter, what would be a typical day at the shelter? I know some shelters have rules about leaving the proximity at a certain time, so just wanted to hear a little bit more about that. I think that would ease some people's minds in terms of the programming that you mentioned earlier.
I'll talk a little bit about DHS policy, and then Matthew can chime in with the on-site programs that his organization will conduct. Under this administration, we changed an agency policy so that individuals no longer have to leave shelter during the day. This is important because it is at the shelter where the on-site social services provided by AAPCI will be, and where they'll be able to connect clients to that work on site. I also did see a comment or a question in the chat about a curfew. We do have a curfew for individuals who are working. Folks can get a pass to come in after curfew. Part of curfew is more about the management of our single adult system. We need to make sure that our beds are utilized, and that we know where our vacant beds are, so that way we can place individuals in those vacant beds. So there is a 10 p.m. curfew for those individuals who are working. They're able to get a pass to come in after curfew. So I wanted to point that out as well. And Matthew, if you could just chime in with some of the case management and on-site services that will be available to the clients here, that would be great.
And so, contrary to what some folks may think, not everybody in shelter is a criminal or a drug user and what have you. As the other lady indicated before, people are there for various reasons. In this particular shelter, like we do in our other shelters, we are intending to provide case management services. Every client that comes into the building will be assigned to a case manager. Every person will be assigned to a housing specialist. There are folks in our other shelters who are currently working. We have sanitation workers in some of our shelters. We have bank managers in some of our shelters. We have folks who are working. We have people who have challenges. We have case managers to address those issues. We have vocational specialists who are there to address issues. One of the things that we also do in our other shelters is every shelter that we've ever opened, every job, every position is advertised with the local elected officials, the council member, the assembly person, the community board. I truly encourage folks from the community who are looking for jobs, who are seeking to volunteer, to help out, to reach out to us, to reach out to the community board, to reach out to the council person, and just to come in and see for themselves, through employment, provide a service and see how great things can be when the community and the service provider work together to provide a service to help people.
Thank you very much. I know we have a number of people who are very anxious to speak here. And I want to try to do everybody the right amount of service. I'll take one more question from a member of the committee. Ms. Thurston, did you have another question? I see your hand is still raised. Is that no?
No, sorry.
Okay. I don't see any other committee members who have questions.
May I just add a couple more things?
Sorry. We're going to have to keep the questions going just for the sake of time. I'm sorry. Maybe
Sure.
There's an opportunity to add the questions in at that point. I'm going to move on to board members, and I will start with the first square I see, which is Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan, could you ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you for chairing the meeting. So I want to thank Deputy Commissioner Drinkwater, Administrator Carter, and Mr. Matthew for their presentations. And I just had a couple of questions. Are vaccines, first of all, vaccines and testing being provided to the residents in-house? That's the COVID vaccine or any other vaccines, matter of fact. I didn't get a clear picture about how the living facilities would be set up. Are they dormitory style or they would be individual units with bathrooms, with individual bathrooms? So those are the two questions that I had. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Drinkwater, are you?
I
best-
got it. I am gonna answer that question.
Ms. Carter, okay, great. Take
Yes.
it.
So the when a new person come to us, we test at intake. So every new person that comes gets tested and they're quarantined before they're placed into shelter. We have mobile vaccine clinics that go around that do testing, that do vaccines on sites. And of course, those in shelters have the same opportunity to go get vaccines at the local areas that surround also. But as you enter shelter, you are tested at the front door. Single adult shelters are dormitory style, and they do share bathrooms. And we provide meals also.
Great, thank you. Just trying to be a little bit more fair to folks here. I'm gonna incorporate some community member questions in here too, just to try to get as many people out as possible. And I'm gonna go in the order that the squares appear for me in this Zoom. So the first person I have here is Carmen Rodriguez and Bill. Carmen and Bill, did you have a question? If so, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
No, we do not.
Okay, I will move on then. The next person I've got here is Pastor Zach Martin. Pastor Zach, do you have a question?
Yeah, so question again is why were the service providers in the community that are already doing work with the homeless not previously informed about this? This is probably the 4th or 5th time this has happened for me specifically. Wynn did the same thing in Park Slope. We work with the homeless. And so why was there not a coalition of concerned and advocating residents and organizations involved in the conversation so we could advocate for this facility before we're having this conversation? The Meeting House, CHIPS, Doe Fund, I could go on and on. There are so many organizations in this community that would love to advocate and support this initiative, and we were not informed. I found out about this secondhand. So the city, you're doing yourself no favors in trying to introduce these things so that YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard, can actually support these initiatives where we don't get such significant pushback. So again, I am obviously an advocate for the necessity of this program and this space, but you need to do a better job of having these advocates on the front end of these conversations rather than when the deal has already been done. So just putting that out there.
Thank you, Pastor Zach. I take that to heart and look forward to working together. The city's process in notifying on shelters, once we have a rated proposal, that is the point at which the agency sends letters and makes calls to our elected partners and the community board. We then usually work with the community board in setting up a community meeting so that way we're able to provide broader feedback and input. But certainly take the recommendation to heart and look forward to working with you on the shelter and others. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person up in my square is Bill Flanoy. Bill, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I actually live on Hoyt Street. I'm also on the board. And I've also been on the board of 2 supportive housing developments. Closest is the Skirmerhorn. What I'm looking at right now, the question I have, some of them have already been answered, but 3 questions. How do you handle disruptive tenants? What's your staffing ratio to tenants? And also, how many security staff will you have on site? Thank you.
Okay, Matthew, are you prepared to take that one?
Yeah, sure. We have, there are going to be 3 shifts, 8 to 4, 4 to 12, 12 to 8. Typically, we have approximately 20 employees per shift. Security staff, maybe with employees and security, closer to 30. During the day during the day shift. Clients who are disruptive are met by the case managers. They're counseled depending on the level of disruption. Clients could be transferred to another facility. We have rules and regulations that every client must adhere by. We have a good neighbor policy. Our goal, again, I'll just say this, our goal is to work with the community, make sure that people understand that when you come into a particular neighborhood, you have to respect that neighborhood. It's that simple. It really is that simple. And again, people are encouraged, the clients are encouraged to follow the rules and regulations of the facility.
Just to follow up on that,
we have
Mr. Flanoy's question, did that mean you have 10 security staff because you went from 20 to 30 and you're going to get into disruptive tenants, right?
Yes, I was going to say, we have the 10 to 20. Again, that is not just security staff alone. We also have administrative staff. We have residential aides who are in the facility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the majority of the client of the staff adds up to the about 20 or 30 individuals. We work closely with DHS. If we have a disruptive client, he will definitely be transferred out of the shelter. It really is that simple. I'm not sure what else.
So I think just to jump in, I think what we have done in all our situations, not just in this particular shelter, but in all our facilities, Iris Rodriguez's staff, they also on site, they come out to the shelters that she manages and meet with individuals who may be disrupting facilities, who may not be following rules and regulations. So the DHS staff is also on the ground. If there's no mitigating of behavior, then we do transfer. And so part of what we want to do that Matthew talked about is making sure that we are good neighbors, right? So if we can't get to that point, we will transfer to another facility. Somebody may need a higher level of care. They may need not a general population shelter. They may need one that has a little bit more, a higher level of clinical staff present. They may need substance use or something else, right? So we do assess every person there. We may think that they fit this population, but they may not. We may see that they may not. So we are always on the ground. Iris's team is also on the ground paying attention there.
Thank you very much. The next person who I see up in the window is Mr. Quinn Raymond. Mr. Raymond, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Brandon. So I saw a flyer about this meeting in front of PS 261 today when I was dropping my daughter off for school. And I probably would not have attended this meeting, to be honest, if one of the other parents in front of his young daughter had not said, oh, great, now there's going to be vagrants in the neighborhood. And the thing is that when he used that language and he was so dehumanizing to the men who are going to live in this shelter, who are our neighbors and also New Yorkers, it really made me upset. It really made me angry. It triggered me. And so I guess my ask to the people who are suspicious of the shelter or who are angry about this shelter is that when you use that dehumanizing language and you refer to these people as vagrants or criminals or dangerous or whatever you're going to say, it just makes the people who are supportive of this shelter dig our heels in and get madder and want to be more supportive of it. So please stop using that language. My question to Matthew is, for people in this community like me and my 9-year-old daughter, how can we be supportive of you and your community?
Great question. I was hoping somebody would ask me that. I really, really hope that once the shelter's open, that we probably have some type of community meeting, whether we meet at the community board just to discuss your concerns, just as we're doing this evening, ways that we can interact with one another, discuss issues, concerns, community issues. That's the way that I think that once the community and the shelter providers get together, we can just address and try to alleviate people's fears. That's the bottom line. I think that that's what's driving this, is the fear of a homeless shelter in our neighborhood.
So I grew up across the street from the 3rd Street shelter on 2nd Avenue and 3rd Street in the 1980s. I've seen pretty tough homeless shelters in my time. I get the feeling this is not going to be that, but we're here to support you. And if there are things we can do that are substantial and helpful, we will do those things. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. I think just to jump in really quickly, I just like to always say in these meetings that, homelessness is just an experience. It doesn't make him, to your point, I grew up in a doubled up experience, tripled up really. It didn't make me less than, just being homeless. It's just the experience. So you have to think about people as humans. And so thanks for raising that point.
Thank you both. The next person I've got up is Mr. John Dew. Mr. John, would you like to proceed with your question? You've got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I want to thank you for taking on such an intense topic at this critical time. I have one request of the presenters, and that request is that before this shelter opens, that there be a policy and procedure manual that the shelter uses and that is distributed to the community board and the local surrounding community so that everyone is on the same page as to how the shelter operates and what to do in the event that there is an issue. Because it is important that this be a success. And for it to be a success, you have to have the entire community on board. And a manual that defines everything that has been discussed and what to do is going to be essential for the community to understand and accept this process. The other comment, Mr. Smith, I needed to make, not related to the shelter, it's related to why we are in this position today. We don't talk about this, and so it's getting worse. Our process of upzoning communities happened in Community District 2 in 2004. And with that upzoning, the entire downtown community of color, rent stabilized, and rent control folks were removed via building condemnation and in some instances, eminent domain. There were no provisions made for accommodating those folks because the community was told that they would all get jobs that would allow them to live a good life outside of
10
downtown
seconds, sorry.
Brooklyn. That did not happen. And so we now have that homeless population that is largely the result of city policy. We have to actually get to the root of this problem so that we can stop having these very difficult meetings and treating the folk in the city humanely from the very beginning. I'm addressing our elected officials because this policy of upzoning has caused the problem of homelessness today, largely. I have a lot more to say, but I'll leave it at that for now,
Thank you, Mr.
Brandon.
Dew. Ms. Drinkwater, Ms. Carter, did you want to respond to Mr. Dew's comments?
Sure, I can respond. First of all, starting backwards, yes, there has been significant loss of affordable housing units over the past couple of decades, significant loss of single room occupancy capacity across the city. These are incredibly important for the prevention of homelessness. In regards to being able to provide information about the shelter, we would welcome board members and community members to join the CAB. This is where we share information about the programming. And also once the shelter opens, there'll be a telephone number that individuals would be able to utilize. And I just also want to make mention while we're on the call and discussing interface with the city, if folks do see individuals who are experiencing homelessness on the street, I do encourage members of this board and the community to call 311 and ask for homeless assistance. We're certainly getting into the cold weather. I believe tonight is a code blue, which means that the temperature is dropping below 30 degrees and we're working to bring folks inside. Folks do often and sometimes reject services. It does take time for trust to be built and folks to ultimately accept services. But calling 311 and asking for homeless assistance will ensure that an outreach team is able to make their way to those individuals and work to engage them. Thank you.
Thank you. I see the next person up in my squares is Miss Jackie Cohen. Ms. Cohen, you've got the floor for 2 minutes.
Great, thanks. So I've lived in this neighborhood for a number of years now. I actually live 2 blocks away from the proposed shelter. And I wanted to echo my support for the project. I mean, I think that we are facing what is really a homelessness emergency, it seems. I was reading in the Times today that over 100,000 children experience homelessness in the past year alone. I am about to become a mother. That is a horrifying fact to me. And, you know, it just seems like, especially as we just heard, like the weather's getting colder, we can't wait. I think that we as a community can house people and also hold the providers accountable at the same time. I think that we have the capacity. It seems like we have a number of very dedicated people to this issue. We can do both at the same time. And I am excited and encouraged and hope to work with folks to make sure that the shelter that is put in place is the best one possible. And that we welcome these neighbors, whether or not they're here permanently or temporarily, with open arms. I know that my husband and I moved to this neighborhood because of its high density and also high opportunity. We live in an incredible, I think the best neighborhood in New York City. So it makes perfect sense that those experiencing homelessness would want to be here and seek opportunity here. My question is, so I'm a little bit familiar with the Community Advisory Board process through other work that I've done. What is DHS doing to ensure that those experiencing homelessness, their voices are heard in those community board or community advisory boards?
Sure. So just so I understand the question, you're the folks experiencing homelessness, their voice being heard in the community advisory board, correct?
Yeah, like how are you selecting who's on the CAB?
Yeah, so the CAB typically is made up of representatives from the community, local business providers. We do sometimes have clients participate in that. Clients have a range of opportunities to provide feedback to the agency through the DHS Ombudsman's office. They can make anonymous complaints through that office. They can name themselves in complaints. They can certainly work on site with staff if they have any questions or concerns. And over the past almost 8 years, this agency and our leadership, and I can certainly let Administrator Carter talk about this, but have taken very seriously ensuring that the voices who have experienced homelessness and are experiencing homelessness are at tables of decision making, that we're hearing directly from advocates, from clients on any number of issues through advocate work groups, client work groups, and so on. So we do work to ensure that folks who are experiencing homelessness are involved in the conversations around policy as well.
Thank you very much. The next person I've got up here is, and they're called Lori's iPhone. I don't have any more information than that. Lori, you've got the floor for 2 minutes.
Great. I just have a number of questions. My first question was sort of like in determining the process of the type of shelter. My son actually attends a school, the elementary school, that's like 0.1 miles, about a block away. There's 2 elementary schools there. And I'm just curious as to why no one considered it to be a shelter for families or single mothers. I was actually raised by a single mother, so I know the difficulty and all of that, and how helpful it could potentially be to have a welcoming school 0.1 miles or a block away. That's my first question. My second question is, can you expand a little bit on the type of single men that are going to be allowed in the shelter? I'm actually a victim of sexual violence when I was a kid here in New York City. So I kind of experienced it firsthand as a child from a homeless person. I have a lot of compassion for them, but I'm just a little bit concerned about men being placed in a shelter so close, particularly when there could be an opportunity for women or families. And then my third question would be, how is that going to be managed? How is the proximity to these schools been developed in the thought process and keeping these children safe. Not that, of course, there's going to be plenty of people, probably the majority, let's just be positive, that are going to treat the community with respect. And I obviously I'm happy to say good morning. And just when I actually live next door to the hotel that housed the homeless, and I taught my son to say good morning to everyone and be polite to everyone. Was not met with the same politeness in many instances. And it was a little bit of a scary time, but I do understand that this is, I guess, allegedly going to be something that's different, but I want to know how that's being addressed and what the thoughts and concerns of the community in terms of children's safety have been thought about, and what you're planning to do to address that. The third thing that I think it's the fourth thing that I'd like to ask.
Could you try to just wrap it up very quickly? You passed the 2 minutes.
Okay. Also, how are you going to handle any lewd acts or loitering around the school?
Thank you. I don't know if you, Ms. Drinkwater or Ms. Carter, want to take part of this question, but I would imagine that Matthew is going to need to take part of this question too.
Yeah, there were several questions here, Laurie. So I'll attempt to take a stab at them, and hopefully we'll address all of them. So we need capacity for all populations, right? So we service single men, single women, families with children, and so single men right now is where we need capacity for the winter, right? So our populations come down, and we've driven our shelter population just under 46,000. That's a big number, but it's down from 60,000 where it had ballooned. But right now our need is for single men. We need it for winter capacity, so that's why the population will be for single men. When you say what type of men, it's just single adult men. There is no. So what we did talk about earlier on is that men enter at our front door, which is at Bellevue. There's an assessment that's made. And if they're appropriate to be placed, so, this is general population. So if they're able to be placed based on, they're able to manage, they don't have mental health that needs to be in a highly clinical setting. They are employed or they're employable, they can go to this general population shelter, right? So we don't say, right, this is men, single adult men will be placed here. I'm not so sure what you mean by proximity to be managed. I think that the men, in terms of loitering, of course, we go back to good neighborhood, good neighbor policy. Matthew and his staff will be doing case management and really talking about how do you fit into a community. And if there are issues that's happening again, there will be a 24-hour number. His community staff, he'll have a residential aide that will do perimeter checks. And if there's what we found in other shelters we've opened is that by getting to know, you'll get to know who the staff is, you'll get to know each other. It's going to be, you'll get to talk to each other. Like you said, Laura, you said good morning to clients. You would get to know who the staff are also. So it's not, you would not be, who's this person? Who do I call? You'll have that. So it will be single men. And if they're lewd acts, if I encounter any lewd act that I feel unsafe, I call the police, right? It doesn't mean that it's a person experiencing homelessness that's doing that, right? You have to keep yourself safe and your children safe. So I can't tell you that, we're going to be managing the men and saying you can't do this, or, it really is for us, we're making sure that we're doing education with men about being good neighbors. We are making sure there's case management services. We're making sure there's housing specialist services to try and move people, get stable and exit. That's our primary goal. There's counseling that's happening. And so that's what the focus is going to be. We want to make sure that fitting into the neighborhood, that we're not, bringing into, to be unsafe or unheard while they're there. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, Matthew or Aaron, but that's how I would answer those. I think I've answered those 4 questions.
And we will continue to have group meetings, workshop with the residents, working with the CAB, working with the precinct. We've already started to reach out to the precinct. I believe it was last week. My director is part of the team right now. And so we have several programs that we're going to engage clients in. again, to respect the community. And again, you know, if there are issues in the community, call the police. We will call the police. And we're going to work very closely with them. We're going to work closely with the merchants. We're going to work closely with our neighbors. We're going to work closely with you. And we hope that you will work closely with us. That's the only way we can engage and make this a successful shelter.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your question, Lori. I'm being advised that we will not be ending the meeting at 9 o'clock, so folks don't need to be worried about that, but we'll be winding down around 9:30. So hopefully we can get through everybody in that time. The next person up on my Zoom is Kevin Chang. Kevin, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Brandon. So first of all, let me say, I think everyone's here with the right mindset to be helpful neighbors, community. And one of the things that we want to understand is $46.5 million. $46.5 million is the proposed contract price that we heard last week for the first time. Help us understand how much of that is being allocated as rent to the property owner, the Chura family, who to this day is still advertising this as a 60,000 square feet office space, Class A office space. So that's my first question. My second question is, I see on the AAPCI website, there's still hiring in process for case managers, social workers, residential aides that just recently got posted. So how far are we in the hiring process to build the team that we are hearing in terms of operating the shelter safely and efficiently? Thank you.
Thank
you for
you.
your questions. On the first one, last week was the contracts hearing. We are working with the provider in terms of finalizing the budget. That's not yet final, but the budget includes the payment of rent as well as the model for social services staff, for meals, and as well as security. So that budget's not final. Once it is, we'd be able to discuss that in more detail to be able to answer the question that you asked. And for folks who are interested, the contract that the hearing was on is available through our contracts office.
Thank you. Matthew, is there anything you want to add about, I think there was a question about how far are we along in the hiring process?
Yes, so what I want to say was this, you will always see us advertise positions on our website and on various other platforms. It's an ongoing process. People come, people go. And so we are always looking for the best that we can, those who are interested in working with the homeless, those who have specialty skills, we always advertise it. So whatever you see on the website is just an ongoing thing, whether it's in the domestic violence shelter, whether it's in one of the hotels, whether it's in the affordable housing programs, we always advertise it.
Thank you. I next have a person who is regarded as iPhone. If this person could possibly just state their name when they're going to ask their question, I will know who you are because you're labeled iPhone and you have your hand up. Okay, I'm not getting a response out of the person. Here we go.
Brandon, would that be me? It's Zero Scala. It may be possible that
Mr. Scala, you are the person named iPhone.
Okay,
Please
I'm
go
glad
ahead.
you found me. Thank
You
you.
have 2 minutes.
Thank you for chairing this evening. My question was, does the DHS have an evaluation system where they evaluate the provider or providers on a regular basis to see if they're adhering to the regulations that they have been agreed to? And if they don't, or if they aren't doing that, what are the penalties for that? Also, someone mentioned that due to the fact that it's winter, that shelter will be single men. I don't quite understand why the season would make it single men and not families. It's just a question that it provoked when you said that. That was one of the other questions I had.
Sure. So, oh, sorry, Jocelyn, were you going to jump in? Okay. So in regards to single men, during the colder months, we do see a peak in our single adult capacity. Conversely, at the end of the school year, we oftentimes will see a peak in our family census. Families will often wait till the school year is over prior to coming to PATH, which is our sexual intake in the Bronx. So that's the seasonality to the increase in the system.
May
The
I add one
question,
more question to that? Basically,
please.
would the shelter ever change over? Would you see a transition occasionally between single men and then families due to other various reasons? So it's a population issue, basically.
Right. So the DHS shelter we have a state oversight through the Office of Temporary Disability Assistance. The OTDA regulations that govern families with children shelters is different than the regulations that govern our single adult shelter system. The requirements for those two systems are different. And so depending, it's very site specific to be able to say whether or not a location that was opened as one capacity would shift between the families with children to the single adult capacity. In this case, the building layout as it is being constructed for single adult capacity would not accommodate families with children. Families with children capacity is single apartments. It's called a tier 2 system, whereas our single adult capacity is congregate shelter with dorm rooms and shared bathrooms. So I hope that adds some clarity. On your first point, you asked about how do we hold providers accountable. There are terms within the contract that our provider must adhere to in terms of the work that they are doing. We also work with providers in terms of meeting metrics around move outs, ensuring that they're moving clients through the system from shelter to permanent housing. I also want to point out New York City does have a right to shelter. This right was granted through multiple court orders, and we have court-appointed monitors. The Legal Aid Society and Coalition for the Homeless are our Callahan inspectors. These organizations come in and do Callahan inspections to ensure that we are abiding by the right to shelter obligation. So in addition to our own oversights, we do have external oversights through our Callahan inspections and also through Office of Temporary and Disability Inspections, our state oversight entity.
So just one more point.
Sorry,
Basically, is
Mr.
that
Scala, we don't have
okay?
time for it.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Mr. David Rivero, you're on the floor for 2 minutes.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'll try to go quickly in the interest of others asking questions as well. So I've been a Brooklyn resident for 15 years, and I fully agree with the need to house people experiencing homelessness. And I lived near a shelter at the Greenpoint Hospital location and near Greenpoint in East Williamsburg. And they were a good neighbor. Those shelter residents were there longer term, and there was a lot of stability there. But I do have some questions around this location and this shelter. They were talking earlier about, I think it was low threshold housing. Is this considered kind of low threshold, more trend like night to night, or is it more stable, longer term housing? That's question number one. And my second point is just to kind of second what Lori had mentioned earlier. This is literally not even 0.1 mile. It's like one street away from multiple elementary schools and young children. Has there been more thought around putting women with families in this, given the proximity to the elementary schools, and given the reality that as a man, I can say this, men drive a lot of the violence in our society and in our world, right? And I think residents are fearful of an uptick in crime. We've seen a lot of very challenging and unfortunate instances of behavior over the past year and a half during the pandemic with some of the shelters in the area. I think a lot of folks in the immediate neighborhood would feel a lot more comfortable if this was housing families and women versus, housing men on a night-to-night sort of basis?
So let me jump in here, David. Thanks for those questions. I think the memory of you have in the shelter in Greenpoint, those were men. That is the same type of shelter, right? So it's men are coming and being there. It's not night to night. So once you're assigned to that site, you're assigned to that site. But in terms of the statistics about crime, actually doesn't play out. Because a shelter comes into the neighborhood. I think people have that perception that the shelter coming in, it increases crime and property values come down. We've heard that throughout. I've been in multiple ones of these meetings and I hear that all the time. That just doesn't pan out, and that it doesn't show that in terms of when we really look at stats. And so I do think that the concern about why not families with children or why not women, again, we really need to look at what our capacity needs are, and we have to be planful. I need to make sure, we always need to make sure that we have enough units because there's a right to shelter. When men and women and children show up at our intake sites, we have to have units for them. So it's one of these things where we have to have a bed for whoever shows up. So as the population spreads, swells during the next cold months, we have to have beds for them. And so I have to, make this. We also, throughout the city, we're opening shelters throughout also, not just here. So we're also getting, families with children shelters and women's shelters and single men shelters throughout. So we talked earlier in the presentation about 90 new borough-based shelters. So we have been doing that. And getting rid of these old, haphazard, really horrible places that we've been putting people in. So it really is looking at what our needs are and making sure that we have it for every population type that we have.
Thank you. Mr. Carlton Gordon, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. I don't think I need 2 minutes. I just wanted to know how can we or one of us refer someone to the intake process that you were talking about?
Oh, easy question. First of all, we hope that you can go to a home base to prevent homelessness, right? Our first pillar is that people don't come to shelter, right? So we want to have people remain stably housed, and maybe we could help that person not have to come to shelter, right? And so we go upstream. If you could, Yuri's on the call, we will get we could tell you about it.
Should start getting no rebound.
Okay, so Carlton, we will absolutely hope they could not have to come to shelter. Call 311 for home base for prevention. 30th Street is in 30th and First Avenue. That's where they show up for shelter.
Great, thank you.
It is for single adult men, 30th Street and First Avenue.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
That's Brooklyn or Manhattan.
Sorry, I got to move on. Aaron Hayes.
That's one of the 30th Street Manhattan or 30th Street Brooklyn.
Manhattan.
Okay, thank
Manhattan. Thanks.
Aaron Hayes.
Yes, hi. I'm very encouraged by the promise of robust social services at the shelter. I wondered if Mr. Okapi could go into more detail specifically about what sort of services for mental health issues and substance abuse issues might be provided at the shelter. Also, and half of that question might not actually apply because I believe Jocelyn Carter said that during the screening process for single men that men with mental health issues will be screened out. I don't know. I'd like some clarity on that. And also, one big concern for people in the neighborhood that we heard over and over in the last meeting that we had was that the prospect of there possibly being sex offenders that are allowed to stay here at the shelter. Would registered sex offenders be screened out, or would they be allowed to stay? Another question is, the last caller asked a question about whether this is a short-term or long-term shelter, and the answer that was provided was that it's not night to night. And I just wanted to ask more specifically what the average length of time of the stay would be.
Great. Thanks for all of this. Before we get to it, I would just like to ask if the response can be kept to 2 minutes. It would help make sure that we get everybody through. Thanks.
Sure, I'll do my best. So this is not a safe haven. Individuals coming to this shelter from intake and assessment would be assigned this shelter for up to a year. It doesn't mean that they would be in shelter that long. Our current average length of stay is a little bit over a year for single adults. And so they would be utilizing that bed placement. Now, if an individual were to miss curfew, it is possible that they would be reassigned, or as was discussed, if their needs aren't being accommodated by this particular location, transfer could be initiated. In regards to the questions around sex offenders, the Department of Homeless Services places all clients in accordance with state and city laws. Individuals who are required to register as sex offenders under the New York State SARA laws would register. There's a subset of individuals who do have residency restrictions. This is a site that if an individual had a residency restriction, they would not be permitted to be placed at this location and would have to be placed at a SARA compliant location. I think those are the two questions. If I missed something, I apologize and happy to follow up.
Yeah, there was a comment about no one with mental health or substance will be screened out. I just have to clarify, when you go to assessment, so they, you might have low level, like, all of us may have some low level mental health issue, and you could be there. It's not, right? It's not it could happen. It's not where everybody will not have, because you might present differently when you come to intake, but may need to have clinical services on site. Matthew's team will have clinical workers there to ensure that if people need connection to services, that does happen.
And just to piggyback.
Thank you. Wait.
Can I
Matthew,
interject
go.
1 second? Brandon, Mr. Smith? May I ask attendees to please not place personal comments in the chat? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Church. Matthew, did you want to finish
Yeah, I
this
just
off
want-
there? If you could do it very quickly.
Very quickly, just wanted
The
to add
questions
that-
are growing here.
Yes, I just want to say this. In addition to that, this is not a mental health facility. However, if we have clients who need mental health services or substance abuse services, housing placement, we have linkages. We're developing linkages with local hospitals and clinics and what have you. With other nonprofits, if they require job placement, resumes, interview services, health screenings, we're developing linkages with local community-based organizations.
Thank you. Can you just say, Mr.
Sorry.
Okabe, can you say a little more about what you mean by
Sorry, Ms.
linkages?
Hayes.
Can you clarify that?
Ms. Hayes, we got to move on to the next question. I want to make sure that we get as many people as we can possibly heard tonight. Mr. Howard Collins is next. Mr. Howard Collins, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I know that when we got the information, the facility is supposed to open in January. My first question is that still the expected date? And then just an overall question, where there's obviously a lot of information, and this is our first meeting. I'm wondering if there can be other meetings. We mentioned the possibility of establishing a community advisory board. I'm actually asking if that can happen in the next couple of weeks, and can more information then, I'm president of the Borum Hill Association. I volunteer myself to liaison with some of the community to be able to talk about more of this information, more questions. One question I also have about your opening is, do you, there's 160 residents planned, do you phase them in? And then my last part of this, besides the issue about meetings, I'm wondering what's planned for intersecting with the business community on Fulton. And again, that ties into jobs, job training, another type of support. And thank you for the time here.
Thank you for the questions. Yes, right now our target open date is January 2022. We do say target because we do require external approvals from our partners at OTDA, DOB, FDNY. The January 22 is our target open date. we can certainly provide updates should that shift. We don't expect it to be sooner. In regards to how we would have clients move into the site, we usually do a phase-in. It's not 160 clients moving in on day one. We recently just opened a shelter last week in Manhattan. We started with approximately 5 clients moving in on the first day, and we work to ramp that capacity up slowly. We want to make sure that everything's running smoothly, that we're working with the community. In regards to connecting with the business community, this is something that's really important. AAPCI, it's our expectation that they'll work with the local business community, vendors in the area, to make themselves known, provide on-site contact, so that way they're able to reach out should any issues come up. In regards to working to set up more frequent meetings, typically when we open shelters, the cabs start upon open. I can certainly take it back to see if we might not be able to have a meeting scheduled for the month of December prior to that opening. I think that, again, we want to be accommodating to answering questions from the community, to providing timely updates on the project, and that can be a very welcome opportunity. So we can circle back to the board on that.
Thank you. And I'm just going to move on to the next question here, but I want to make everybody aware that as we've been going on and other people have been asking new questions, we're getting up closer to 9 o'clock here, and I want to try to get as many of these answered as possible. But if you don't have your hand raised as of 9 o'clock, I can't guarantee that your question is going to be answered. So please get your hand up as quickly as you can if you are. And I'll leave it at that. The next person up I've got is Ashkan. Ashkan, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. You have the floor for 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna keep it very short. I guess my main question is to even build to build a condo, local engagement is required. There are processes where there are town halls and people have to vote on some of these matters. I just wanted to know what kind of a say local residences have had in terms of both voting prior to this event and going forward. We still live in a democratic society where I'm just curious to see if it's just, where do some of the local residences who are against this process, that are they like 20% of the, the population? Are they like 60%, 70%, 80%? And I'm just saying that in the context that on the last hearing, there were many people who called in from the principals of schools around, from many different local businesses, Downtown Brooklyn Coalition, that were strongly against this proposal, just given the experience that they've had with the homeless shelter at Aloft. And that was not a single men's shelter either, but the issues in terms of harassment, in terms of groping, masturbation, urination, and whatnot. So I just want to see what type of voting process has happened and what kind of a voting process is going to happen. Thank you.
Drinkwater, you plan to take that?
Sure, thank you. So as was mentioned by the council member elect, shelters do not go through a ULURP or approval process. They're as of right developments that occur in the city. Under the Turning the Tide plan, we recognize that community input is important. Each year, we've sent letters to our elected officials and to the community board requesting sites for homeless shelters to be considered. We don't often, to be honest, get responses to those letters. And we work very diligently to make sure that we are meeting our legal and moral obligation to provide shelters to New Yorkers who are experiencing homelessness. We've mentioned the open-ended RFP. This is the avenue in which providers can bring us sites. We do also have a link on our website that individuals are able to suggest locations that they might believe to be suitable for shelter, and then leave it up to our development team to understand whether or not that site would meet the OTDA requirements under the state regulations for shelter. In terms of if there's actions that have been taken, I don't believe the board took a vote on the proposal. Again, those proposals are, from the agency point of view, really seen as ways that we can further our work together. The agency, or excuse me, the community board doesn't have the ability to bind the agency in terms of an up or down vote on the project. But meetings like this allow us to hear the feedback from the community and work to be able to respond, like Mr. Collins' suggestion of having a meeting prior to the shelter opening, as well as the different types of information that's been shared to address the community's concern and start building the relationship with our provider who's here with us tonight. So that way the community can gain familiarity with them and their work as well.
Thank you. Mr. Harrison Tam, you have 2 minutes.
All right. I guess the first question is, how does this project get approved without a final budget? It's like, I think we're all in alignment that, hey, homeless need help, we should help them. But we, as the taxpayers, want to see our money used efficiently, right? So like, how, it's just hilarious that there's no final budget and this thing got approved. So I was just curious, how is that happening? And then secondly, you know, everyone's preaching, you know, these high morals, standing on their high horse, and we get it, but this isn't a land of fairy tales and dreams, right? You guys hired an operator who's currently being investigated for shady dealings. So, I mean, it just seems, you know, a bit counterproductive, right? Like we're trying to do a good thing, but then we're doing all these shady things. So any clarity on those answers? I'm assuming no, but I thought I'd just throw those questions out.
Sure. So part of the process, once the organization submits a response to the open-ended RFP, that response is rated and approved, and there is an award that is made. That is the first step in the process. And the reason why the agency comes to our elected officials and the community board at that time is because we do believe that that notification is important. But what it means is that we don't always have final documents. And it does put us in a position where, like tonight, we're not able to point to a final budget. The contract hearing was last week. As I mentioned, that can be made available through our Office of Contracts. But again, the final budget is not approved. And part of that is trying to do notifications as early as possible to the community. We'll be able to provide updates on the budget, on the contract as they happen.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry, Mr. Tam, we need to let Ms. Drinkwater
That's just a
finish her
canned answer.
statement.
That's not a real answer.
I'm sorry,
Well-
Mr. Tan, I need you to respect the order of the meeting, and we need to allow the presenter to finish the answer. Ms. Drinkwater?
I also mentioned earlier that prior to the opening, the fair share will also be submitted to our elected officials and to the community board. We have to bring on capacity quickly while also maintaining requirements that are required under procurement in terms of our contracting obligations. And this is how.
Like, why can't?
Mr. Tan, I'm going to ask you to please allow Ms. Drinkwater to finish her statement.
This is a canned answer.
Mr. Tan, I'm going to ask you one final time to please refrain from interrupting Ms. Drinkwater. Ms. Drinkwater?
We need to bring on capacity to ensure that we're meeting our legal obligation. Our sites open with our approvals by our state oversight agencies, by moving and working with the controller's office in terms of having registered contracts. As was said, documents in their final form can be made available when they're final. There was another question by Mr. Tan, and I do apologize. I don't remember what it was. Working with AAPCI. We, through the contracting, through the open-ended RFP, have to find a provider responsive and eligible to work with, and we're doing that.
So
we work to build.
Mr. Tan, I'm going to ask you this is the last time. If you keep interrupting Miss Drinkwater, I'm gonna ask that you be removed from the meeting. I'd like to allow you to listen to Miss Drinkwater's answer because you asked her the questions. But at this point, I can't do anything more than that. So Ms. Drinkwater, do you want to finish answering the question?
Sure, happy to. So part of the determination that is made during the review and awarding of the RFP is to ensure that the provider is capable to do the work that they are proposing.
Thank you very much. Next up, I've got Nick. I'm sorry, I may not pronounce your name correctly. Nick H. Would you like to ask your question? You have 2 minutes.
Yes, no worries. Hovsepian is the last name. I know it's a mouthful. I've lived in the neighborhood since 2014 and have a few questions. Question 1, will the results of the fair share for siting analysis be released to the public and reviewed before the project is formally approved? Or do the findings of that study ultimately not matter? Ms. Carter, I might point you to the September 2019 New York Independent Budget Office fiscal brief detailing that properties located within 1,000 feet of 2 shelters trade for 17.4% less than those within 1,000 feet of just 1 shelter, since you mentioned earlier that the impact on property values is a myth. Question number 2, something that is important to me. Pastor Zach mentioned knowing people who would be residing here. Will the residents be specifically from this community, and how is it ensured that the residents are a homeless population from our community and benefiting from this exact location specifically? My third question is, there was an October 3rd, 2021, so pretty recent New York Times article mentioning the provider paying himself over $500,000 a year while running a nonprofit, employing his brother in a very high paying role, and also employing his sister-in-law. The city directed him to fire his brother and to restructure according to the article. What has the follow-through been on this? Finally, we appreciate the budget currently being worked out, but can DHS commit to a date when they can provide a clear and transparent overview of the budget? Thank you.
Lots of questions there, Nick. So let me start with the residents from this community question first. So we in our alternative site plan, we want to make sure that residents are placed closest to their anchor, their boroughs where they come from. So not necessarily a community, right? It's boroughs. So our primary concern is to place residents who come from Brooklyn in Brooklyn. And so that will be our first look, right? So we want to make sure that does happen. The second thing is the IBO report is that you're talking about. It's not looking at alternative shelters. It's a different report addressing point number 2. Fair share, yes, will be released. And the New York Times October article about the CEO paying himself. One of the things that you have to be aware of is that when you do a fair salary analysis, the salary that Matthew is being paid is comparable. There's a salary analysis being done to other non-for-profits, executive directors, CEOs within the sphere. So it's not, anything different. And this is a man who founded this organization and works, multiple hours. So not to speak for him, as somebody says he needs to answer himself, but I'm answering what Nick's questions are. So
sorry, there was another part of that question that was.
I'm sorry, we can't have a back and forth here. Ms. Carter, if you can finish answering the question.
Yeah. Thank you, Brendan. So the other piece is that the agency, in terms of all of our providers, we want to make sure we strengthen providers and looking at governance. So we are working with this non-for-profit and looking at a governance structure. So we are working with the organization at this point.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick. Michael Shapiro, you have 2 minutes. We have Michael Shapiro.
Thanks so much.
Oh, go ahead.
So 3 specific questions. First, will the developer commit to ensuring that there's verification of the vaccination status of folks residing in the shelter. Second, could the developer comment on the number of folks already hired of the 20 or 30 anticipated staff for the shelter? And third, would the developer commit to releasing any city investigations or the results of such investigations into the developer that were referenced in the studies that Nick mentioned?
So I think these questions, Erin, I think you and I may be able to answer. Matthew answered a number of folks hired. The status of clients' vaccinations, the city, we have not, as a city, mandated vaccines for those who come to us. As you know, the city has mandated vaccines for city staff, but not for clients. We make vaccinations available. We encourage, but at this point, we don't have a vaccine mandate for clients who use our services. So it is not on AAPCI or any of our other providers to mandate that for clients come through our front door. We offer at the front door. We do the testing at the front door when they come to us. In terms of anything in terms of any governance structure, it's DHS and DSS that does all of the management of providers and looking at what if there's any challenges or any challenges, anything we need to put in terms of structure that comes through DHS and DSS, and we're the ones that manages that. In terms of hiring staff, Matthew, you want to address that question?
In terms of hiring staff, we currently we started an interview process because we anticipate that the shelter will be open in January. So we've had a flood of resumes, applications. We started the interview process. Folks are being given dates and coming back for second interviews. So we are in line and putting ourselves in a position where by January, we'll have a full staff ready to mobilize.
Will you respond directly to the
Sorry.
allegation from the New York Times?
Mr. Rivero, you're not on the floor. The question has been asked, the question has been answered. I can't tell anybody to like or dislike any of the answers, but we have to have a process to allow everyone to speak.
That question was
Mr.
not
Rivero, I'm going to ask you not to interrupt the process. If you continue to interrupt the process, I'm going to ask that you be removed from the meeting. The next person on the floor I've got is concerned PS 261 parent. This person, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Oksana, and I moved to neighborhood because of the safety reasons. It's been promoted as a very safe neighborhood. And I used to live in the area where we had a shelter, and I was attacked by a homeless person on multiple occasions, unfortunately. And once I was sexually assaulted while I was with my daughter. So my question is what you can do to protect us from such situations, and if there will be any additional security provided for the school in this case, because I've seen the problem unfortunately is real. I do support homeless people, I want to help them, but not all of them are nice, and some of them are actually quite very dangerous.
Thanks.
That's it.
Ms. Drinkwater, who do you think should answer this question?
So we spoke a bit about the work that we do to ensure the placement of our clients to an appropriate program shelter. We also spoke a little bit about if a client requires a different or higher level of service than what's available at this particular location, an individual can be transferred. Matthew also spoke about the work that his staff will be doing in terms of connecting individuals to social services, to housing supports, to case management. But he also talked about security that would be working in the neighborhood. Over the course of the past couple of weeks, I've talked to some parents at nearby schools. And one of the things that I communicated to them was that having those conversations learning about things like pickup time, dismissal time. It's very helpful because that's information that can then be shared with Matthew and his team as they're working to do work in the neighborhood, serving our clients and making sure that our clients and the community stay safe. So again, sharing information is very helpful. So that way we can work together to ensure that this program is successful.
Thank you.
So
Peter Leubner. I've got
Yes, hello. Yes, hello. I have a question regarding the New York Times article from October the 3rd in relation to Matthew O'Keefe's brother, who he employed as a chief financial officer, and his sister-in-law that allegedly also served on the board. I understand from the article that the city directed Matthew to terminate his brother and restructure. So I have two yes or no questions, because I think the questions before have really not been answered. One, has Mr. O'Keefe's brother been terminated from the position of chief financial officer? And two, does his sister-in-law still serve on the board? Thank you.
So Peter, let me answer that question. What I said before is the same thing I'll continue to say, is that we're working with the organization around governance. And so they are working, DSS, DHS, and AAPC are working together to look at the governance at this point.
Thank you. Samantha Johnson. Floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Brandon, for holding this very intense conversation. I want to first say that we do have to be very, very mindful that the land in which we're arguing, it doesn't belong to any of us, is Lenape land. And so those who are very privileged and very happy to be able to stand and sit and relax inside of their wonderful multi-million-dollar buildings or even their brownstones, that this is a very contentious fight about land and property. So the second thing I wanted to say is we have to also be mindful that when we're referring to people who are displaced, that homeless individuals are still community members, and that even if, as one member mentioned, a high moral value, it is about that. We have to treat people like people. Everyone on this call is one paycheck away in some instances from homelessness. And we have to be mindful that when you're talking to people who've experienced harm in many ways by the state or government, that we are also talking about people who are right next to you, who are in your buildings, who are inside of your homes, your schools, etc. The last thing I want to mention is to the mention of DHS. DHS has a lot to work on, absolutely. I do think that there can be more vetting of nonprofit executives, thinking about that in a more deeper context, but I don't want to negate the fact that this particular facility being argued, I wish that same contention was being argued when we were talking about 11 Hoyt. I wish the same contention was being argued when we were displacing individuals from HRA shelters, that limited access for people to get benefits, entitlements, and services. And also when we're talking about the deep crime, so to speak, that's happening and vaccinations. I wish that those questions are also being asked inside of your own buildings. That do you ask your neighbor, are you vaccinated, before you talk to them on an elevator? I don't think those questions are being asked because there are people of color that will be in this facility. I think that is making it very hard for people to understand that. So I do want to wrap up and say that this facility I am in support of. I do think that because I live around many shelters, I learn my neighbors. I do talk to them. If they say hello or they don't say hello, we are not owed that. We are owed just the humanity and understanding that they deserve shelter. Community members deserve the right to having the benefits, entitlements, and services like anyone else, and being able to live their quality of life to the best of their ability. So thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thank you, Samantha. Betty Feibush.
Hi, thank you, Brandon, for hosting this and so on and all you do. So my questions are kind of all together about what is a day in the life of a person. So the person is in a dorm. Does that mean there's 5 people, 10 people, 50 people? How are they in beds or cots? How many people share the bathroom? Then if it's somebody that wants to sleep all day, can they sleep all day, or is there terms of being there that they have to work on their planning for their, future housing, employment, and so on. It was mentioned that meals are given. Are these like cold sandwiches and an apple, like some school lunches, or will food be prepared? Do they have microwave or refrigerators access? And what about their belongings? So many times the people have, a lot of belongings, and sometimes they have medication that they don't want, taken, that they need to hold. Sometimes the medication needs to be in the refrigerator. And finally, do they have a proper address for mail, because people need mail from their different benefits or so on and so on. So I know that's a lot, but it's really about the quality of life for the person in the facility.
Thank you. Mr. OKBA, would you like to respond to Ms. Feibusch's question?
Sure. So many questions. There are small dorms. We generally have approximately 2 to 6 people in a dorm. That's one. The food is catered in. Medicine is stored. There's a refrigerator specifically just for medicine. The individual's name is placed on the medicine whenever they need it. The case manager is very aware of what medication he's on, and the case manager makes available to the individual. In terms of clothing, we do have clothing that's also donated. We work with various clothing outlets to provide and donate clothes from the community as well. I'm sorry, I think there were so many questions.
Okay. They come in with stuff, their belongings. Can they?
Their belongings.
lock it?
So we have, everybody has a closet. I mean, it has a locker with a lock on it. We have a small storage room. It is not a huge storage facility, but as you know, people come in with belongings, and we try to store as many as we can.
Right. And the address.
Thank you. Just for everybody's awareness, we gotta try to get through as much as we can. So I gotta keep it moving. And there are several people who are putting your hands up at this point. I honestly can't promise that you're gonna get to ask your question. I know where the 9 o'clock ended with who had their hands up at that time, and I'll try to get to it. Megan Scholier, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Hi, Brennan. Thank you. So I have 2 questions. The first question being, so we keep mentioning this fair share survey. I was wondering if someone from can just give a little explanation in detail of what that means for this development. And 2, so you're putting a curfew on the shelter for 10 p.m. What does that mean after 10 p.m., right? Like, is the security going to decrease? Will people be gathering outside of the shelter after 10 p.m.? And also, I guess the third question, I'm a fairly young resident of the neighborhood. I'm a young woman, walking down the streets. I was wondering, what are you going to do just to protect my safety? There's no doubt that, the homeless members of our community have a right to housing, but also I would say that, as a young woman, I have the right to be safe in my own neighborhood. So I was just wondering what I would like specific details on what you can, do to guarantee my safety in my neighborhood. Thank you.
Can I take that one?
Please go ahead.
All right, so in terms of curfew, yes, there is a curfew. What does that mean exactly? It means that you have to be in the building or else you will lose your bed. Winter is around the corner. Clients have to sign in. The staff are patrolling. Does that mean that security will be reduced? No, it means that security will still be the same. We'll still maintain security around the clock. As I mentioned, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Your safety is of concern. As I also mentioned earlier on, we'll be working with the local precinct, and they will know us, we will know them. If there are any issues or concerns, we will definitely be working closely with the precinct.
Thank you very much.
And if I can just follow up.
Sorry, that doesn't answer all my.
Sorry, we don't have any time for any more. I really want to get to everybody's point here, and I appreciate Mr. Okayi's answer. I want to move along.
Brandon, we didn't describe fair share, just to be what fair share
Can you
is.
do it briefly?
Yeah, quick, Erin.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So under the city charter, the agency is
I'm
obligated.
sorry, Ms. Carter and Brendan, I hate to do this because I know you're the chair of the committee, but I think in fairness of time, is it possible to explain fair share in the chat so that people
Okay.
can read it and
Sure.
maintain it?
Perfect.
That way you can still answer questions from people who've been politely waiting for all this time?
They disabled the chat.
Well, to Carolyn or Taya, just please put the information in a link to Fair Share so that way everybody can have it. And then people can still have their questions answered because you are running against time. I think that's the most equitable way to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singletary. And I think it's a fair point. So I have about 5 people who I had their hands up at 9 o'clock, and I want to try to get to those people. Hayden is next. Hayden, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you. My questions are for Deputy Commissioner Drinkwater and Matthew. And the questions are about the proposed operations and the contract specifically. There's been a lot of verbal assurances made about specific programs, linkages, and responsibilities. My first question is for Deputy Commissioner Drinkwater. You had mentioned that the Office of Contracts is the place to access the contract. But I went on the website, it's not user-friendly. It's a little bit unclear to the public. Given the importance of this situation, can you please share the contract directly with the community board and the public at large? My second question is whether the contract is final and has it been fully executed? My third question is, are these verbal assurances of program, security, and services actually drafted into the language of the contract in detail with clear, precise, and objective metrics? My fourth question is, there's been a lot of high-level talk about getting the public more involved, a lot of verbal assurances. Does the contract have specific legal language clearly detailing out this obligation? And it specifically mentioned setting up and funding a public advisory board and a dedicated liaison between the shelter and the community. And if it does not, can that be included? And finally, my last question is, what are the remedies that can be had by the city and equally important by the public should the operator not meet these conditions and metrics?
Drinkwater.
I'm sorry that you're having difficulty with the ACO's website. I can certainly reach out to our ACO's office in terms of making the contract available. I'll have to get back to you. Currently, the process is that individuals are able to come to World Trade. However, because of the pandemic, I do know that we have made contract documents available remotely as well. I do just need to find out what our latest practice is. I do apologize, I haven't gotten this question in some time. In regards to the contract language, there is language in the contract as it relates to the obligations of what the provider must need to do. There's regular oversight by the agency on that contract language. In regards to the cabs, we have made a public commitment in terms of the Turning the Tide shelters to have cabs at all of those shelters, and the shelter will be no different. And I think that was it, but I apologize if I missed one. There's a couple questions in that set.
I asked about remedies.
Remedies. So we work with providers if they're not meeting their contract obligations through our program administrator, through our deputy commissioner who oversees our single adult capacity, Iris Rodriguez, who's on the call this evening. And then if there are concerns that warrant it, we can put the organization on a corrective action plan. And if if the organization is not able to fulfill the requirements of that corrective action plan, contracts have and can be terminated. We do end contracts with providers who are not meeting the requirements of our high quality shelter.
Thank you. Jason Gordon, 2 minutes.
Hi, can you see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, this is supposed to be a hearing about One Hoyt. However, there is another shelter that is in process for being opened on Atlantic Avenue. And I've also heard musings of shelters being considered also nearby on Hanson Place and St. Edwards. with all the considerations due to, the fair use, fair share, I should say, it seems to be that there is an unnecessary burden being put into this neighborhood on it. And I'd like you to comment on these. You can't take one shelter out of context. You just can't look at one at itself, because the other shelter, especially on Atlantic Avenue, is well on its way to coming online. So now we're talking about actually like double the number of people within a very close proximity, about 2 to 3 blocks area. So that's my first question. The second question is, with all of the, how do we know that all of this won't just be lip service about safety and the way that they're going to run the facility, and that they're actually going to stick to it? Ms. Drinkwater was just talking about how there are ways to, find a provider guilty or, not following the contract, but how do members of the community get a chance to voice their concerns if we feel that the shelter is not being run properly? And number 3, third question is, are they in the African American Planning Commission, Inc. and or the Department of Homeless Services commit to releasing the recommendations of the investigations mentioned in that New York Times article? And fourth question, are there going to be any rules about loitering in regard to this shelter day and night? Thank you.
So in regards to shelter rules, we do have what's called a good neighbor policy for our clients. And so clients sign that document. And as I mentioned, if clients need a different or higher level of care, they can be transferred. Somebody's not on mute, I don't think.
Ms. Simon.
In regards to the concern about paying lip service, or how do members of the community outreach to the agency. Yuri Sanchez, our Brooklyn Borough Director, is on the call tonight. She is the liaison between the Borough of Brooklyn and DHS. She is a point of contact. However, community members can also call 311 to issue concerns or complaints. So I'm trying to work backwards from the other questions. In regards to the other locations that you mentioned, at the time in July, when we sent letters about 1 Hoyt Street, we also alerted the local electeds to a location on Atlantic Avenue at 316 Atlantic Avenue. That site is not slated to open for a couple more months. We are working with the community board to have a meeting about that site. And then there are 2 additional locations, one on St. Edwards and one on Hanson Place, that we made notification calls and emails to our local electeds and the community board a few weeks ago. And we intend to have similar community meetings as this one for those locations as well. I look forward to discussing those locations at that time.
This may be the last question I can take.
Frank,
Scott,
you didn't answer my question,
Scott,
though.
sorry, I have to move on. Scott Demel laptop.
You didn't answer how they all will interact with each other.
Mr. Gordon, I'm sorry. If you're going to keep interrupting in this proceeding, I'm going to ask that you be removed. Scott Demel laptop, you have the floor for 2 minutes. I don't see Scott Demel laptop. Robin Chow.
Yes, hi. My question, I just have one question. Who is ultimately responsible and liable for incidents that happen as a result of this shelter? And what recourse do the residents have?
Not so sure I understand your question, Robin, but one of the things that I would say is that, again, DHS will be placing men that come through our intake. The provider will be ensuring they follow the good neighbor policy. We'll have security for the provider in the shelter. We'll have security cameras. And if you're seeing anything that's untoward, we'll have a 24-hour number. If there's an unsafe issue, you would also have the police, right? So I'm not so sure what the question means, but that's how it would be my best guess at answering that.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. this is the final question, and this is the last person that I observed having their hand up at 9 p.m. Fred F. Fred F., you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I just have 3 questions. One, something I just heard now. What was this notice that was said that was sent out July 1st? Because everything I was told, even when I had reached out to the local city council members, was they all found out the same time that I did, which was just about a week and a half ago. The second question is, this budget hearing that occurred last week, was that open to the public? Did we as taxpayers have a say in any of this? And my third question is, Jocelyn, why are you answering every question that's directed towards Matthew about the New York Times article and his family members? Why can't he answer the questions that are directed towards him? That's it.
Okay, just for the sake of this, Matthew, do you wish to make any statement about the New York Times articles?
Someone had said that an earlier caller said he gives himself X amount of dollars. I don't give myself anything. I work for a nonprofit, and the board of directors are the ones who approve the salaries of most executives. For those who don't know, I put in over 72 hours a week working there. I'm not a voting member of the board. My salary, as stated earlier, is in line with the salaries of other CEOs of similar size organizations that provide similar services in New York City. I oversee 250 employees. I am the CEO. I am the executive director. I oversee programs. I oversee an organization. And that's what I'm going to say to that.
Ms. Drinkwater and Ms. Carter, did you have anything to add in response to the questions?
No, I think Matthew covered it, but I know that Fred asked 2 additional questions, and if he could just repeat them.
What was this notice that you mentioned that went out July 1st? Because as I heard from both my city council members, they all found out about a week and a half ago when we were informed of notices. And also the communication's been pretty poor on everyone's part. I saw this on a flyer in the street, just happenstance.
Got it. Thank you for repeating the question. So I certainly can't speak to what the various offices have said. What I can say is that back in July, we sent emails to the community board and to the elected officials, alerting them of the plans to move forward with a location at the 1 Hoyt Street address. We also attempted to make calls to elected offices. In regards to your other question, that was about
Was the budget hearing, was that
the budget
available to
hearing,
the
yes.
public?
Yes, so the budget hearings are all placed in the city record. Any individual is able to come and make comment at that hearing. Typically, budget hearings are with the office of the controller, with the agency. While the public can come, we do find these conversations with the community board to be much more effective. The staff at those locations typically are not responding to questions in the same way that we do at these meetings. But I do know that members of the community did come to voice their opinions at that meeting that occurred last week at the 1 Hoyt contract.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify? since
Sorry, no clarification. I can't take any other clarifications, and I appreciate.
Why not? He represents us. Let him speak.
Sorry, Mr. Fred, I have to try to maintain a pretty orderly meeting here, and I'm not
Orderly that you started late and you couldn't get it under control. So
Mr.
let us
Fred.
hear from the people that represent us.
Mr. Fred, every single person here has had an opportunity to speak at
But our
the
questions weren't really
with the level. I'm sorry.
I don't think it's fair that we
Every
lost about 20 minutes, though. I've had my hand up for a while, and we did truly lose 20 minutes of airtime. So I don't think it's really fair to cut it off right now.
All questions.
Hear us out.
Hello, everyone.
All questions
I-
from 20 minutes after.
Everyone, listen.
Considered.
We have had a meeting for 2.5 hours here this evening.
No, it's been for
where
2 hours because
where
you
every
started
person-
late because you were
I'm sorry,
unprepared.
I'm not gonna, I'm gonna ask for the community board office to remove anyone else who continues to interrupt my statement here at the end of the meeting. And I'm sorry about this, but I've spent the entire meeting listening to everyone in the community, which I completely respect everyone's views on this issue. This is a heated issue. It's an issue that we're going to continue to have follow-up with DHS on to understand the impact and the surrounding circumstances associated with this proposed shelter. In the course of doing this, I think it's important to point out that for the additional shelters that were mentioned, there's going to be additional hearings that are going to be held in the coming months. In addition, for anyone who has not had Hello. So for anyone who's not had their question answered tonight, they will have an opportunity to ask their question of the community board office, and the community board office will make their best efforts to forward the questions and get answers from DHS. This may be the end of tonight's meeting, but this is definitely not the end of the discussion and certainly not the end of anyone's concerns respecting this issue. I can certainly understand that from everyone in the community. I can certainly understand that from the elected officials, and I can certainly understand that from the providers. I'm hopeful that this will be a format where we can continue engaging with each other and ultimately create a situation where we can make the most of this arrangement. I'm hopeful that honestly is the case. And I'm sorry if anybody doesn't feel like they've been fairly heard fully tonight at this meeting. I've tried to do my best, and I hope that we'll continue to have a good conversation about this going forward. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Shame on you.